celebrates our $5,000 teacher winners in iHeartRadio's Thank a Teacher, powered by Donors Choose. Still time to nominate a public school teacher making a difference. They could be the next to win $5,000 to make over their classroom. Do it now at iHeartRadio.com/teachers.
Basketball Jones is back over here, right? 651 guy at the Coffee Maniac household. Glad Slow-Mo is back, and I guess we really don't need Tyrus, I'm thinking. This is dictated because Bones is way better than I thought. Plus, I love Io's game.
Probably Tyus Jones.
Yeah, Tyus Jones. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, and the first game, it seems like he really had excellent chemistry with Jaden McDaniels. Like to see them together on the floor more. Well, I think we did see the promise in the second quarter in Denver of what Bones and Io might do together just running.
Yeah, it's fun.
And that's a nice change of pace for a team. What the best teams, I think, do is they rely on different people to do different things, and they give their offense a jolt, maybe with other players who aren't the main players, a different way to score, a different, I guess, spirit to it, a different tempo to it. That's not always going to be easy in the postseason, but it's not at all a bad idea, I wouldn't say. I didn't get to this with Johnny, but a texter raised, though, a fair point. We all love Mike Conley, right? We all have appreciated what Slow-Mo did, and we all love Ingles, right? But can you make the argument that that's one roster spot too many for quasi-assistant coaches, ambassadors? Because I think you could. I think you could say, now, well, the unknown is at the expense of who? There may not have been anybody that they really had a chance to bring in via buyout, for example,
right?
Who might actually be able to help them in a playoff game more regularly. Because I think right now, I think Johnny thinks Slow-Mo can still be a factor. Maybe he can. I haven't seen him in a while.
Right.
I still think that's going to be limited. With Conley at this point, I think it's going to be limited. Doesn't mean he can't help in a game. And with Joe, he's just there, right? We know that. So I think it's a fair observation to make that as popular as those guys all are, as much as we like having them around, would it have been better if you could find another guy who might have a chance to be a player now or a player later? I think that's fair. But on the buyout market, nothing's happened yet. And I think, who's the guy with Dallas? Longtime veteran. I think he's staying with Dallas. He was one of the names that had been mentioned about it being a buyout candidate. And I don't know how many others are even out there at this point. Let me revert back to the Basketball Jones discussion. This is from Alan in Afton. Dan, are you suggesting we should get the commemorative prints ready to celebrate almost doing something? I thought you were the guy that would say, nice, but win something. If you're winning, or if you're writing a column as an Inkstained Wretch, would you be this positive on almost doing something? Have you really gotten this soft living here this long? This may be proof that you are one of us now, after all. I don't think it's going soft. I think it's all timing, right? I think you look at the landscape. I said this, I can still remember the day my good buddy Roger Hedrick, I don't think he's with us anymore. Is Roger Hedrick still alive?
I don't know. Is Chris Middleton the player you're talking about?
Chris Middleton, yeah. Thank you, is the player I was thinking about, who I think is says he's going to stay with Dallas.
It seems like it, yep.
Roger Hedrick used to run the Vikings. And I don't know that he said this to me or he conveyed a message that he wanted to make sure it got to me. And it was a belief that I was inconsistent in my commentary on a toughness scale between how I wrote about the Vikings and how I wrote about the Timberwolves.
Interesting.
Now, this goes back to probably the early Steph Marbury Garnett days a little bit.
He's 89 years old, by the way.
He is alive.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. Sorry, Roger. I shouldn't have done that. I should have checked first. In any case, he felt like, man, wish you were as easy on us as you were then. And I think my retort was, well, the programs are in different places. So you grade on a different curve. In other words, as the Wolves ascended a bit, it was improvement over where they had been, which was not even within a sniff of the playoffs, right? Marbury Garnett period, there were signs that they are ready to emerge.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
I grew up on it.
And so at that point, I think it's easier to be positive and to say, this is better. It looks like something's going on. The Vikings were much further along in whatever they were attempting to do. So, example, if the Vikings, as they did under Denny, lost in the first round of the playoffs 3 straight years, by year 3, you're up in the ante on the criticism. Same with the Wolves eventually. When the Wolves were making the playoffs early after having never made it, they got celebrated because they had not even been a factor. But guess what? I think we were one and done 6 straight years. And as that pace quickened, then guess what? We started grading on, or at least I tried to start grading on a tougher curve for the Wolves. I think that applies right now. I'm grading, starting with go for men's basketball, on a curve where if, let's say 2 years from now, they're playing 500 or a little below 500 still in the Big Ten, chances are I'm not going to be as positive as I am now, knowing what they're coming out of and factoring in the number of injuries that this team has suffered. And you're allowed on the basis of the eye test to say, well, it looks like they got somebody who basically knows what he's doing. That's not saying we're on the verge of winning a Big Ten title. In the case of the women, it's even easier. I mean, they are in a place they've not been in close to a decade, where they're going to make the postseason and they're going to make it with a bullet. They're not going to wander in. They're not going to backpedal in. And let's remember, it got pretty rough here the last few years under Lindsay, correct? It was not going well. So I'm grading right now on a different curve. If the Gopher women the next 2 years go back into the tank and end up, as a 1-year wonder, then yeah, it's. I don't think it's going to continue to be celebrated. In the case of the Wolves, Final Four the last 2 years is good. Now we all are aware if they don't go as far, they'll probably get ripped.
I think we've been pretty hard on the Wolves this year.
I think we have. So I don't think I'm going soft necessarily. I think it's more, well, what's the landscape that we're working in regarding each of those programs, each of the 3 programs? And you have to factor that in. And I just don't know how you watch the Gopher men's team, even when they lose, given their deficiencies and given their lack of depth, and say, well, they should be getting, as sad as this is, as a threshold, they should be getting blown out regularly. And they're not. They have a bunch of losses that were 5 or less.
Yeah.
A few overtime games.
Some heartbreakers. They go to Michigan, and they end ultimately there, I think, lose by 10. But based on everything we knew, it felt like it was going to be 20 points. It was
maybe
a 6-point game with like 8 minutes left. It was crazy.
So I don't think there's any softness. I think, the ante can always be upped, and you can grade on a tougher curve, but we got to realize where we are and where we have been. So you're looking for, I look for signposts for a while of progress. Now, that eventually it has to be more than that, and it has to be more victories, and it has to pay off. In the case of the women, they got a lot of victories this year. That's a good record.
Most Big Ten wins since 1985.
Yeah, exactly.
13 and 5.
I don't think there's any apology necessary for praising that program right now. So that would be my answer to Alan from Afton. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to lie to you. I was starting to get sick and tired of all the hockey talk we were on. I mean, we were talking nothing but hockey. Yeah. And I was trying maybe to downplay the fact that we've lost 2 in a row.
Yeah. Well, and I've always
or
said,
not make a big deal of it.
With this one, too, I would say to Alan, basketball is one of your love languages as well.
Yes, there's
You're
no
a basketball
question.
guy.
Yeah, that's it. I
Going
can't
all the way
deny
back
it.
to Gary
That's
and Magic
correct.
Johnson.
I did have a basketball Jones. Cheech and Chong were right. Go all the way back to watching high school basketball at Memorial Auditorium in Gary. I had a basketball Jones, even though I was already watching Chicago Blackhawks hockey because there was no pro basketball in Chicago until the mid-'60s. So there was room for both. There was room for pretty much all of it.
We should pause here.
PJ got the love. Ben got the shove. Hoops, purse strings, tight like a glove. Wolves in 5. Jonathan from Bloomington, speaking of grading on a curve, I realize it's hockey, but should we not be harder on the men's Gopher hockey and their season? Louis says no. I say yes. I get it. You know, we lose people. We're younger. We're refashioning the thing. I'm enough of a hockey purist to believe that we should never dip as low as we have this season. I'm sorry. Now, I'm not calling for everybody's head. I don't mean that, but right. I actually don't think they're getting enough heat. Now, I should qualify that because we do get texters who are frustrated, hardcore hockey fans who are.
Yep.
And they may be unrealistic in what their expectations are, but I
look at track record, though, too. Like, Bob had that thing humming pretty well.
You have to.
Right? I mean, a couple of Frozen Fours and all of that.
The argument, though, for me is if you have the machinery that we have, and I know college hockey has changed dramatically from, let's say, 30 years ago in terms of depth, et cetera, and where people go and where they're willing to go. I just have a hard time believing it ever should fade to the level that we seemingly have this season. Where else was I going? I had one other text. Oh, any other team in this market would kill to go to the Final Four 2 years in a row, and people still rip the Wolves. Well, that speaks to some of that's insane, but some of that speaks to what kind of curve you're grading on. And it's only natural, and it's a compliment, I think, to a certain degree, that people want more. They go, yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I remember what it used to be like, and I appreciate it, but by God, you got Anthony Edwards. I want to see the next step taken. I always want the expectations to go up. I really do. I have no problem with that. Within reason, obviously. But we are grading the Wolves on a much tougher curve for that reason. Basketball Jones for the Wolves this season, I think at a minimum is they go back to the conference finals. And for some people, that won't be enough. It'll be you got to go further. I will say, to me, it all depends on how it plays out.
That's the whole thing.
If they get to the conference finals and get swept and aren't competitive, I'd say, well, you might have to start thinking about changing some of this configuration of this thing. Or maybe you look back on, maybe you do try to get back in the honest thing. I don't know. But if you go to 7 games against one of the top 2 teams in this conference, because that's likely the way it would go, then I don't know that necessarily I'm going to lose my mind over it. That speaks to how solid this franchise across the board has come. Are we having problems selling tickets? Is that true? The texter who texted earlier, the Wolves.
I don't know about that. It's not at the level. But is that
the spoil? Does that mean we're spoiled? Like, okay, it's regular season.
Yeah, could be.
We're kind of okay. I'll get back to you when the games count again. We've been here before. I want to see where it's headed.
Could be. As we've talked about, the prices have gotten more expensive, so it's a bigger commitment, even for a single game. If you just want to pop in, they haven't played great at stretches, even though they're in the number 4 spot, right? And to me, the attendance thing, especially with 41 games, The attendance thing to me always gets a little bit overblown because there's a million reasons why people don't go to games.
Yeah, you're right.
But part of it might be too, familiarity. People know that the playoffs are coming. They know that bigger games are on the horizon. They might not be interested in a couple of games that are in the middle of the week, or even sometimes the 8:30 games I think works against them. Against the good teams, they're on national TV so often that these 8:30 games on a Wednesday night, that's a tough putt for some people. Like, I'm not that enthralled by them, even to watch them, let alone go to them.
No, yeah, that's fair. I mean, right now, outside of, I guess, the Lynx and the Frost, and I don't know what expectations are for the Lynx next season. Is there going to be a next season, by the way?
Well, start there.
Yeah, I have to start with that.
I was told yesterday this week appears to be pretty monumental
Crucial
to
week.
actually get it going.
Well, that's what I thought, because I think there's a quasi-deadline.
Yes.
That is the first week in March. Well, what's the date today? The 3rd?
March 2nd.
Today's March 2nd. Trade deadline in the NHL is it the 6th?
6th, yeah, Friday.
So it's Friday. 2 o'clock?
I don't know the time. I'll look it up.
Because I'm going to reach out to Garen, because either way we'd want to have him after the deadline, right? If we make a big move, to celebrate it. If we don't make a big move, to rip him for not getting something done.
2 o'clock Central.
2 o'clock Central on Friday.
Friday, March 6th, 2 o'clock Central.
Friday, March 6th. I mean, in this town. Well, how do we view, what are the expectations right now that we're putting on the Vikings? Is it to win a single playoff game? Has it reverted to that? It almost has, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's been kind of a while.
It's been a while. It hasn't happened under KOC, right? We haven't won a game.
Right.
In the postseason. Short version of what I want to get into in more detail in the 5 o'clock hour, but we have different listeners who come in and out different times. I'll ask you the same question I asked Johnny. If it ends up being that the real choices that the Vikings are looking at are Geno Smith and Kyler Murray.
Oh, man.
Does that do anything for you? Because it doesn't do much for me.
Not really. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to think about who it...
I even theorized yesterday, if literally that's what you're down to, I might say throw J.J. McCarthy to the Wolves.
Right.
Just go.
Right.
Work at it, work with him all off season, and just keep going, even though I'm not convinced he's going to end up, being as good as I hoped he was when they drafted him. But and maybe I'm underrating. I mean, maybe I'm penalizing Geno too much for being on a bad team last year.
It's possible.
But Kyler just doesn't. Look, I'm a one-man band on A-Raj. I get that. I'm obsessed with him. And you a little bit, I think.
This year, much more than last year. I would do it.
Me too. But it doesn't sound like it's something they're even looking at. Whether they could or not, it doesn't appear there's any momentum from any of the Jackals who cover this team that they're even sniffing around Aaron Rodgers. So okay, I don't know. I'm bored. I'm bored with almost everybody else. I think Jones, and I might be overrating Jones, but I think Jones might interest me the most if I can't do Cousins. I shouldn't. I mean, if that's not Freudian, I don't think. If I can't do A-Raj, what was the Orlovsky order? A-Raj, Cousins, and Kyler. That's what he said.
However, today he said it was either today. It must have been today because it's Monday. He said Mac Jones. He said you got. He said trade for him.
I knew it.
That's the first. So he's almost amended his
own. Maybe he learned something about Rodgers.
He may have, as we said on TV on Friday.
He interests me more than those other guys.
I agree.
But then you got to give something up. I get that.
That's it.
But I might be willing to do it. All right, bottom of the hour break. It's been a very eventful weekend in the world. And when stories like these develop, like what is happening in the Middle East right now, we go to basically, he is the geopolitics editor of the Bumper to Bumper program. Edina's own former CIA officer, Michael Hurley, who also helped to write the report worked on the 9/11 Commission and helped write the report as well. He is going to join us next. Very curious to hear what he has to say about the weekend. Stay tuned. chances are, if our next guest is booked, it's because there might be a crisis going on. And I think that certainly applies after the U.S. forces and Israeli forces both hit Iran very, very hard. And now the conflict in some ways seems to be widening a bit. We're going to get into all of that and more with former CIA officer Michael Hurley, Edina's own, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Thank you for the time. I'm sure this did not take you by surprise in that there were indications that something big might be coming. Based on what you know, your best instincts, and perhaps even people you talk to, what do you think is the real reason? Not necessarily the stated reasons, because there have been a bunch across the board. What do you believe is the real reason that Trump made this decision over the weekend?
Hi, Dan. Here we are again, another crisis. I think the real reason, I think the underlying reason behind a lot of this is just what President Trump has been saying, which is that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. And I'm just wondering whether there was intelligence that they're back working on that, the Iranians, and that although when we bombed Iran, what was it, in the summer, I think, and we said that, or the administration said that their nuclear weapons capability was obliterated, that I'm not so sure that was the case. And so perhaps they thought because there had been a kind of a tumultuous time in Tehran and Iran, there's terrible inflation now, and there was the rioting and all the protests that were going on in January, that this was the time just to kind of finish off that issue and completely destroy the capabilities of Iran. I think that may have been it, but I'm not sure, because a number of different rationale have been offered, Dan, as you know. Is there?
But it certainly appears as if they're doing more than that. And on the nuclear part, the messaging here is obviously, for me, part of the issue, because I think it was the state, as recently as the State of the Union, certainly back when we bombed that time, but repeated in the State of the Union, what the president said was that the nuclear program of Iran was obliterated. And then in one of his interviews over the weekend, he said they were 2 weeks away. So that, I think, is part of what causes some confusion about exactly, what we're doing in this situation.
Well, the messaging of the administration has not been clear, and it's skipped around from different goals and aims, and I think that does lead to confusion. You're right. It's more than trying to end the nuclear program, although I do think that's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm in complete agreement with those that believe that Iran just should not be allowed to have nuclear weapons because of the nature of the regime. Ever since 1979, it's been a rather outlaw regime, and with no respect for human rights, using proxies all over the Middle East to foment conflict. And for that sort of religious theocracy to have a nuclear weapon, I think, would spell trouble, not just in the Middle East, but beyond, as Iranian scientists have been trying to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, which eventually would be able to reach the United States with a warhead on them. And so I do think that was kind of one of the precipitating causes. On the other hand, I've heard administration officials assert that there are so many things that have happened, so many American soldiers in the Middle East and in South Asia, in Afghanistan, for example, have been killed by improvised explosive devices that have been supplied and created by Iranians. So they've taken a toll on the United States. And if we go back to the bombing of our embassies in the late 1990s and the attack on the USS Cole in 2000, I think, October 2000, there has been a lot of attacks on the United States from Iran, and President Trump seems to be taking a very hard line here and saying enough with this. we're going to deal with this. I think one of the problems is, Dan, though, is how much can you actually deal with it from the air, just using air power. You can bomb sites, you can bomb Navy ships, you can bomb a lot of the defense capabilities, but it's a pretty entrenched power structure in Iran, and decapitating the leadership, which we've done, at least with the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, is dead now. But there's so many layers beneath that, how do you root that out without actually putting ground forces in? I'm not sure how that's done.
Based on your own experience in the Middle East and what you've read and believe and folks you've talked to, is there any sense that there is within the country potentially, because it sounds like the strikes are going to go on here for a while, a galvanizing force that could coalesce and become something to potentially take that power away from, as you say, the regime? Because it's not just, it's so entrenched, no matter what the demonstrations indicated, it's so entrenched, it's not just about one person. Is there any reason to believe that we know, or are we just hoping that something might coalesce involving the Shahs, the Shah's family, whatever the case may be?
I think there is substantial opposition in Iran against the regime, and I think especially the younger generation really wants reform. They want to be travel the world to study outside of Iran. They don't want to be seen as this pariah country anymore. And it's not just young people, but there's opposition to the regime and to the theocracy. The problem is that those in power have been so ruthless to put that down and to put any opposition down. The numbers vary, but you hear numbers that the government killed 30,000 Iranians during the protests just since the beginning of the year. Whether that number is accurate or not, I don't know. I've seen numbers like 7,000, 8,000, still a lot of people. And when you ruthlessly put down any opposition like that, it has a big effect. Now, one of the things that could happen in Iran now, given the actions of the U.S. government and the Israeli government and our militaries, is there could be sort of a decentralization of power, because it's not just the Persians in Iran. There's Baluchis, there's Azeris, there's Kurds as well, too, all of whom have their own interests. And so unifying that to get behind creating some kind of representative institutions is going to be, I think, very, very difficult. And the other thing to bear in mind, Dan, is that the country has 90 million people. It's a pretty big country. And so finding out who to support and which democratic movements there could possibly gain power is going to be part of the problem. And then if they're being ruthlessly put down by what remains of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Quds Force, and those loyal to the leaders there, it's going to be very hard. And I really hope, and I'm going to be watching for reporting on this, that the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, and the administration has a plan in place for supporting any kind of movement towards democracy there. It's going to take a very complicated, complex plan to be able to do that. You can't just, I don't think you can just rely on sort of saying, we bombed the Iranian military, and now it's okay, you can just take to the streets and you'll be able to achieve your objectives. I don't think it's going to work that way. That's just my opinion.
I want to read you something I read on X. This is from, I think, a political writer. If you call yourself a progressive and you're not even a little excited by the prospect of a woman-hating, gay-hating, Jew-hating Neanderthal regime that in no way represents the will of its people being crushed, you're not actually a progressive. Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree that I agree that it's a terrible and sinister regime that oppressed its people, that violated human rights, that killed Iranian people just expressing sort of freedom of speech and so on, or trying to get that and ruthlessly put them down, that I'm happy to see that regime ousted. I just don't know if we've been able to actually oust it. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. These things are not easy, and it's not, in my view, going to be like Venezuela, Dan, which has been touted as a success. We captured President Maduro and decapitated the leadership there, but those in power now still are really kind of the remnants of his administration. So I'm not sure how much has actually really changed there. And in any event, that's an easier task than what we'll be facing in Iran. So, yes, I'm happy that Khamenei is gone, and I'm happy that, we appear to be making some progress, but I think you have to sort of take a long-term view here and see what happens over the coming weeks and even months to see if this is going to be successful or whether these actions have added to an already chaotic Middle East.
A former congressman who I think you're familiar with, Adam Kinzinger, who described himself as a proud rhino, wrote this: "It's completely acceptable to hate the Ayatollah, hope the U.S. wins and succeeds, and also believe that the president should have come to Congress and made the case to the American people." Was that a mistake?
I agree. I agree with what Kinzinger has said, and I think it's always smart. It's always smart for an administration to consult with Congress and to make the American and to bring the American public behind what the administration wants to do. If they have a persuasive case, the American public will follow. One of the problems that happens is that if things bog down and things get really tough there, if you haven't made that effort to really explain why we're doing this, and you don't have Congress behind you, then it's going to lead to a real fall off in support from the American public, which you kind of need which you definitely need if you want to sustain our military role there, especially when we start taking losses. I think there are 6 service people who have been killed so far, and that number is likely to go up for sure the longer this conflict goes on. The Iranians are relying on drone warfare in a lot of ways, and I think we're seeing the future of warfare being demonstrated now, and they'll just use drones on all these places in the Middle East that they think are the countries that are allying with the United States. And so it's kind of a frightening. We have overwhelming power. I'm not suggesting that we don't, but changing the reality on the ground is going to take a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice, I think.
The Iranian strategy seems to be, as you say, we're sending these drones everywhere. We're going to maybe deal with some oil tankers. We're going to nail a couple of hotels. And the hope seems to be the strategy that if they do enough damage, that those countries will turn on the U.S. and say, you got to call off your dogs here. This is getting out of control. But everything I've read so far, Michael, is it's doing the opposite. That so far it's making those countries, in many cases, seem more interested in following the U.S. lead, or certainly not separating themselves from that. What do you make of that strategy?
Well, I think your assessment of that is right. They're sticking with the other countries in the Middle East are sticking with the United States so far, and I think that's a good thing. We'll see if that continues, if they start taking serious casualties, and the longer that this drags out. I don't think in any event that the Trump administration is going to change its mind based on pressure, if it eventually does come from the Gulf states, for example. I don't think that's going to deter this administration from what it wants to do. I think it has its objectives, and it will stick with going forward full speed until those objectives are accomplished. One of the things, though, Dan, that there's some very practical considerations here, which is we're going to be going through a lot of smart bombs and a lot of munitions very quickly, and we do not have, that is, our military does not have an unlimited supply of those. And if you're using a lot of those reserves up in Iran and fighting this conflict, you've kind of depleted resources for if something else pops up, which you can never totally plan for, but you can sort of always bet on that there'll be some conflict coming up in Asia or in Eastern Europe or something like that. So I'm sure our leaders are aware of that, and trying to figure out how to make sure that our forces have the resources that they need.
There was an analysis out of, I believe, in the New York Times by Stephen Erlanger that I thought raised a lot of interesting questions, and it seemed to, I think, the big conclusion was that maybe the regime does make it, who knows yet, but that the Islamic Republic is already unpopular, it's already weakened, and now, in the words of one writer, further diminished at home and in the region, the lowest ebb since its leaders took power during the revolution. This is part of what fascinates me, is we tend to think about the Middle East as if it's static, as if nothing ever changes, like it's 23 years ago with Iraq. And it does seem, in a lot of ways, that the landscape is very different. Can you speak to that issue and how that pertains to, the current situation?
I think it has changed significantly. I think the regime in Iran was weakened. It has been weakening over the last couple of years. We have talked about this before, Dan. In the Israel's targeting in the past couple of years of leaders in Iran. They killed, I think, the leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think this was about a year ago. And these operations that they've had there, where the Israelis seem to have known where Iranian leadership has got to have created paranoia in Iran. So that was weakening. The economy is terrible. The inflation rate is extremely high. I think people are unhappy. After the bombing, I think it was last June, was it 12 days of U.S. and Israel, that really, put a thunder punch on Iran and really made some of its proxies in the Middle East stand down. And that was, a significant change. So there are these changes that are taking place. And I think it's quite possible that because Iran was in this weakened position, the government there, that perhaps that explains the timing of President Trump's decision better than anything else. I do think there are significant changes that are taking place, and it's just unclear now how it's all going to play out over time.
Before we get to it, there's a couple of good questions that have come in to the Bradshaw and Bryan KFAN text line as we continue our discussion with Mike Hurley. Before we get there, I heard Rahm Emanuel a couple times. He's doing a lot of analysis these days for CNN. And he has gotten into something that I've not heard a lot of other analysts discuss. I'm curious to get your reaction to it. And for Emanuel, one of the concerns for him, where he does think this particular issue is going to be very big as it plays out, he said over years and decades, not just minutes, that this is perceived more as us with Israel together in a way that he says we've tended to not go. Therefore, countries who are anti-Israel can view us as doing their bidding in a way that maybe we've done a better job of, at least in theory, separating a little bit. Is there anything to that, or is he overplaying that aspect of the story?
So Dan, just to clarify, so his point is that we're too close to Israel now? Is that what he's arguing?
That in this case, almost as if maybe it was their plan and that we got talked into, and to a certain extent Trump is doing Israel's bidding.
Yeah, I have heard that argument, and there's no question that Israel is our principal ally in this, and we're cooperating so closely in these attacks on Iran. I do think that we have interest to protect our national security beyond Israel's interest in protecting its own national security because of a concern about the nuclear weapon threat if Iran were to develop one and then have missiles that could deliver them, intercontinentally to get to the United States. So ensuring that capability doesn't exist, I think, is in the U.S. national interest. But yes, I can see that previous administrations have wanted to maintain at least a degree of separation from Israel and not, just give a blank check to every action that Israel was taking. Now we are very, very closely allied, and I think have been, in particular, since the attacks from Gaza on Israel back a couple of years ago on October 7th. And so I suppose that's a perception that could affect us in the eyes of other countries in the region, that we're too close to Israel. But a number of those countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, they're mortal enemies of Iran as well too.
Good point.
So that they applaud Israel and the United States for actions that weaken Iran.
Text from Todd wants me to ask you, how much of Iranian leadership do you believe are true believers, as in those who really believe God put them there to attack the West, as opposed to more cynical, self-interested actors who just want the power? And how might that dynamic affect the outcome here?
I think that's a really interesting question. There's no question in my mind that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the recently deceased Supreme Leader, was a true believer. I've read his speeches in translation, and for 40 years, he's ended his speeches by starting the chant, "Death to America and death to Israel." And so he definitely was anti-West, anti-United States, and I think there are a number of people around him that are true believers as well, too. But I find the question really interesting because I think the implication of it is, or what I infer from it anyway, is that, I agree that there are any number of people who have profited from the corruption, the scandals, the ripping off from the Iranians that were in Iraq, for example, and were just carting off with money and wealth and so on, and who have profited greatly from the positions that they're in. And I wouldn't call them true believers in the same sort of terrible principles that the Supreme Leader had. But there are any number of people that will feel threatened now because these wonderful livelihoods that they've had, being allied with the theocracy, and rising because of that in power and stature and wealth, is going to be cut off, or could be cut off, and they'll fear that and they'll fight against that.
One of the questions in this country, obviously, is whether we might end up having to deal with sleeper cells here that might be activated at a time like this, given the desperation of the Iranian government. Do you have any belief or any knowledge of what kind of reach the Iranians have in that regard? Have they been so weakened in recent years that, there might be the chance of somebody acting on their own, saying they're doing it on behalf of the cause, but less likely that there would be anything organized here from Iran, sleeper cells, et cetera? What's your level of concern regarding that issue?
Wasn't that shooting, was it in Texas or the Southwest anyway in the last year or two, of someone who was angry about the U.S. attacks and
indications? Yes,
Iran?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and that's likely a lone wolf. But I mean, what you cited is a fear of mine as well too. That are there sleeper cells? One would think that the regime was so paranoid in Iran that they know that their military capability is really very nothing compared to that of the United States. So they can't win a conventional war. And when that happens, then usually they use asymmetric kinds of kinds of attacks. So trying to get a sleeper cell or some qualified, personnel, kind of the way Putin has done in Europe, sending people to kill the enemies of Putin, trained agents. I wouldn't discount that. I think it could be a possibility. One hopes that the FBI is all over that and has got eyes on potential Iranian agents here. But you always have to fear that there are those that you don't know about, or that the government doesn't know about, and that could do some damage. They definitely will want to strike back in ways that will get the American public's attention. And so if they have that kind of capability, I imagine they'll light it up.
Two last things real quick, and we could talk for hours about this stuff. We always appreciate your insight. The president spoke, I think this was in an interview with, might have been Jake Tapper of CNN, basically saying that, well, the big wave hasn't even arrived yet in terms of what the U.S. has planned. Do you have any idea what that might entail or what he might be referring to?
I don't have a real clear idea. That I think Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, said the same thing today or yesterday as well too. That sort of, I guess the implication is you haven't seen anything yet, and so I don't know. It could be like waves and swarms of U.S. launched drones, for example. It could be complete disruption of cyber in Iran. It could be taking control through cyber we have some pretty good offensive cyber weapons, but critical infrastructure, for example, in Iran, the Iranians, of course, when these conflicts start, completely control the internet. So people aren't really able to call out of Iran or even contact their kind of Persian family in the United States. And there's a lot of Iranians, as you know, Iranian Americans now in Los Angeles and in other parts of the country. And so I think that, all those sort of capabilities are out there. So it could be an attack. The U.S. really turning on some of these cyber capabilities. It could be using swarms of drones, taking down more and more of the infrastructure in Iran. I'm not really sure this is just speculation on my part, Dan, but no doubt we have an amazing array of capabilities. And so far, we've been kind of focused on using smart bombs in this bombing campaign, and each day taking out more ships in the Iranian Navy and production facilities. Of course, we've seen the decapitation of the Iranian leadership. But the question always is, as these goes on longer and longer, the conflict goes on longer and longer, is how many targets do you have left after a certain point? But yeah, I imagine there's still, quite a number of tools that we have that have not been used yet, and maybe that's what they're referring to.
Last item on the subject. People always at a time like this worry about, the U.S. might and Israel might have certain intentions about the limitations of this war, but there are unforeseen circumstances that can suddenly make it a widening conflict. Do you see any signs of that? Is that something you're wary of, and what would you be looking for there?
Well, you do sort of see it expanding. Israel has been attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example. So that's heated up quite a lot. The Iranian drones, as we've discussed already, have attacked other places in other countries in the Gulf. And I expect that's going to continue for a while. So, I think other things can emerge. That's the one thing about war. You can have your plans and hope that things go your direction. I'm always reminded of that famous line from the boxer Mike Tyson, who said, "You have a game plan in boxing until you get smacked in the face," and that throws your plan out pretty quickly. So I think that there are any number of things that could happen, and I sort of wish that this is just me now. This is an Israeli United States action. I always like to be in a position where we've got our traditional allies on board as well too, because they have interests in the Middle East, the Brits, the French, the Germans, and to have that sort of sewn up to be getting more help. And I'm sure we're getting intelligence help from them as well too, but this so far is an administration that likes to go it alone in these matters. And it's really hard for me right now, and we'll talk about this more in the future, I think, Dan, but to see over the horizon and around corners as to what might be coming at us. It's just hard to predict.
I'll leave you with this. This is from Secretary Rubio earlier today, I believe. The president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties. That's not exactly going to discourage the notion that this is, more of an Israeli operation that we kind of piggybacked onto.
Yeah, but it begs the question of whether we could have, that is, the administration could have put the brakes on it as well too. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see Israel taking unilateral action without having some backing from the United States. Now, they will do that if they think that their own security is facing an imminent threat. But, typically they try to have the U.S. on board. So it sounds to me like Rubio's playing a bit of a game here. He wants to make the argument that the Israelis are going to do this, so we had to participate to protect our own forces in the Middle East. Maybe, but my guess is that we were involved in the planning from the beginning.
That's why we have you on, because you can translate for us because of all your experience. Thank you, my friend. Always good to catch up. And the next time, maybe we'll talk what the Michael Hurley Vikings quarterback plan for 2026 is, because I know you have recommendations there. I know you pay attention.
I do pay attention, and I'm hoping for a good draft, and we'll see. But I think we need a better season coming up than we had in the last one.
Thanks again. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. Michael Hurley, former CIA officer, Edina's own, an attorney a long, long time ago, all sorts of jobs for the government, working at the Pentagon, 9/11. And decided at that point he wanted to go back out into the field, into the Middle East as well. And we became familiar with him, and he's been joining us for years, especially at crisis times. We are very late. I apologize for that, Guardsy. Top 5 is coming up next with, I'm sure, some good headlines.